In an age ruled by kings, where empires stretched across oceans and men bowed to crowns of gold, there lived one man who dared to imagine a world without them. His name was George Washington. To some he was a soldier, to others a farmer. But to history, he became something far greater. The father of a nation. Today, in Illyrion Stories, we travel back to the dawn of a revolution, to witness the rise of a leader who could have been a king, but chose to remain a man. 1. The dawn of a new world. The year was 1732. In the vast wilderness of Virginia, among endless forests, fertile rivers, and tobacco plantations, a child was born who would one day alter the course of history. His name was George Washington. The world he entered was one still ruled by the old order: kings, crowns, and colonies. The British Empire was at its height, stretching across continents, commanding armies and oceans. And in that empire, America was but a cluster of distant colonies, loyal subjects taxed and governed by a king an ocean away. Washington's family was modest by colonial standards. His father, Augustine, was a farmer and businessman. His mother, Mary, a woman of strong will and devout character. When his father died, George was just 11. From that moment he learned self-reliance, not from comfort but from necessity. He grew into a young man of discipline and quiet intensity. He studied land surveying, a profession that took him deep into the untamed wilderness of Virginia. There, alone among the trees and rivers, he developed an understanding of the land and of human endurance. By his early 20s, Washington's ambition and sense of duty drew him into military service. The French and Indian War erupted, a global struggle between Britain and France for dominance in North America. Washington volunteered to fight for the British crown. He was young, brave, and inexperienced. In 1754, he led a mission to confront French forces in the Ohio Valley, an expedition that ended in disaster. His men were outnumbered and outgunned. But in defeat, he learned what few men of his time understood: that war was not glory. It was sacrifice. Through the chaos of that conflict, Washington witnessed the arrogance of generals who cared more for rank than reason, and the suffering of common soldiers who paid the price for it. Those memories would never leave him. They shaped the quiet, patient leader who would one day rise not through privilege, but through perseverance. 2. The spark of revolution. 2 decades later, the world had changed, and so had George Washington. By 1775, tension between the American colonies and Britain had reached a breaking point. The colonies were taxed heavily, denied representation, and treated not as partners of the empire, but as subjects to be controlled. Across taverns and town squares, voices whispered a dangerous word: independence. In Philadelphia, delegates from the 13 colonies gathered at the Continental Congress. They debated, argued, and dreamed of freedom. But freedom needs more than words, it needs leadership. When the question arose of who could command the Continental Army, all eyes turned to one man: George Washington of Virginia. He was respected, disciplined, and, perhaps most importantly, trusted. On June 15, 1775, Washington accepted the role of commander-in-chief. What he inherited, however, was not an army. It was a desperate collection of farmers, blacksmiths, and volunteers armed with hope more than weapons. They faced the mightiest military force on earth. Yet Washington carried something stronger than muskets or cannons: conviction. The early years of the war were brutal. The British took New York. Philadelphia fell. Supplies were scarce. Soldiers deserted. But in the winter of 1777, in the frozen camp of Valley Forge, the revolution reached its lowest point. Thousands of soldiers suffered in the snow, barefoot, starving, and sick. Washington walked among them, wrapped in his cloak, sharing their pain and their resolve. He wrote to Congress, pleading for aid, for supplies, for the survival of the army. And though the government failed him, his men did not. The harder the conflict, he wrote, the greater the triumph. It was there, in the cold silence of Valley Forge, that the spirit of America was forged, not in victory but in endurance. Through discipline, sacrifice, and faith, Washington's army emerged stronger, and from that frozen winter came fire. 3. Victory at Yorktown. 6 long years passed. Battles raged across forests, rivers, and fields. Towns burned. Families were torn apart. Yet the dream of independence refused to die. In 1781, destiny arrived in the small Virginian town of Yorktown. British General Charles Cornwallis entrenched his army there, unaware that Washington and his French allies, led by General Rochambeau, were closing in. The American and French forces surrounded the British. The siege began. Day after day, cannon fire thundered across the horizon. Smoke filled the air. The earth shook with every blast. And then silence. Cornwallis surrendered. The war was over. The impossible had happened. The American colonies had defeated the greatest empire on earth. Tears filled the eyes of soldiers who had given everything. The dream of liberty had become a nation. At its heart stood George Washington, not as a conqueror seeking glory, but as a servant of freedom. For the man who refused the crown. When peace returned, the world expected Washington to seize power. After all, every revolution before had ended the same way. One ruler replaced by another. The army adored him. The people revered him. The Congress trusted him completely. He could have become America's first king. But instead he did something no one anticipated. He resigned. In December 1783, before the astonished Congress, Washington laid down his sword and stepped away from power. "Having now finished the work assigned to me," he said, "I retire from the great theater of action." The world watched in disbelief. King George III reportedly said, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." And he did. He returned to Mount Vernon, his farm, his family, his peace. For a brief moment, he vanished from the stage of history. But the people would soon call him again. 5. The birth of the presidency. The revolution had won independence, but not stability. The young United States was divided by debt, politics, and fear. The Articles of Confederation, the first attempt at a constitution, were failing. People needed unity. They needed leadership. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia. The delegates wrote a new foundation for government, a republic, not a monarchy, based on law and liberty. And when it came time to choose a leader for this new system, there was only one name the nation could agree on: George Washington. In 1789, he was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. When he took the oath of office in New York City, a hush fell over the crowd. For the first time in history, power passed not from king to heir, but from the people to one of their own. As president, Washington faced enormous challenges. The country had no established laws, no stable economy, and no permanent capital. He built the foundations of governance from nothing, appointing trusted advisors, establishing the cabinet, and setting precedents that would define the presidency forever. 2 terms later, he could have held power indefinitely. But once again, he chose restraint. 6. The farewell of a true leader. In 1796, Washington announced he would not seek a third term. In his farewell address, he spoke not as a ruler, but as a guardian of liberty. He warned against political parties that would divide the nation, against foreign entanglements that would drag the country into war, and against blind patriotism that forgets reason. "Guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism," he said. He reminded the people that unity was their greatest strength, that America's virtue must outlast any leader. And with that, he stepped away once more. He returned to Mount Vernon, where the sound of the Potomac River carried through his final years. Peaceful, content, fulfilled. 7. Legacy eternal. On December 14, 1799, George Washington passed away at the age of 67. The news spread across the world like thunder. In Paris, Napoleon ordered 10 days of mourning. In London, the British Parliament stood in silence. In America, churches rang their bells for hours. For in his death, the world realized what he had truly achieved. Not victory in battle, but victory over himself. George Washington did not teach the world how to rule. He taught it how to lead. With humility, with principle, with compassion. His example endures as a timeless reminder that power without virtue is hollow, but leadership with integrity can change the world. And so, more than 2 centuries later, his name still stands, not for conquest or empire, but for freedom. George Washington, the man who refused to be king,